So welcome to the latest MQ Open Mind podcast. And today, Craig and I are delighted to welcome Flo Sharman. And Flo is a mental health campaigner who really all her life has dealt with the challenges of both mental and physical health problems. So welcome to the podcast, Flo. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
I'm delighted to be here and very much looking forward to our conversation.
Welcome in.
And we're also, and Craig's obviously doing a quick welcome as well. Sorry, Craig, I caught over you there.
No, I always realise I never say anything in the beginning, so I'm just jumping in. Hi, I'm here.
Also, huge on behalf of MQ, I know you're one of our ambassadors, so thanks a million for all the work you do for MQ in terms of raising awareness and advocacy and so on. So maybe can we just begin, as some people do, obviously in the beginning, just reading up about your story. I know you have, as I mentioned in the intro there, really from a very young age, have experienced both physical and mental health problems. Do you want to tell us a bit about about that?
So my family always say that I've used most of my cat with 9 lives because I, at the age of 4 months old, stopped breathing and I had to have life-saving surgery to stop me basically having apnea. And this basically started my whole mental and physical health journey, which I now know is lifelong. I had quite an easy, after those difficult first 4 months of my life and a good 2 months in hospital at Birmingham Children's Hospital, my family kind of thought, we've gone through this battle, we're not going to have any more challenges. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. I was a slight late developer, walking and stuff, but nothing really major. I went to a wonderful primary school and I remember the day like it was yesterday. I wish I didn't, but it's like if I close my eyes, I can take me right back to that moment. My life completely changed. I was only 8 years old, which I think many people are surprised to hear how someone can have a mental breakdown at such a young age and it be so much of a crisis. I went to bed one evening. Life was looking good. I was a happy-go-lucky child, had amazing parents, and was living life to the full and had everything to look forward to and ahead of my life, and was living a great childhood. And then one evening I went to bed, and in the middle of the night I woke up paralysed. I couldn't talk. I was blind. I was hallucinating. It was terrifying. I was so scared, but didn't really know what was going on. It was more my mother who was the most scared and terrified of what was happening. And I was rushed into hospital with, at the time, they thought it was a bleed on the brain or a brain infection. But after so many tests, and I remember I was this young 8-year-old girl who had no idea what was going on, had all these doctors and nurses swarming around me, doing all these tests, and all the tests were coming back normal. And they were like, we have no idea what's going on here, but something is. But they ruled out brain infection, they ruled out bleed on the brain, they ruled out everything. And I stayed in overnight and they said, you'll be absolutely fine. That wasn't the case at all. From that very moment, my life changed forever. And I became a mental health sufferer, labelled with 4 mental illnesses, nearly sectioned at a tier 4 clinic and excluded from my primary school. So yeah, it was a big thing that happened basically overnight.
Whoa, I mean, what a journey, what a start. So you woke up paralysed.
So I remember it like fully. My whole left side of my body, my arm, my leg were completely paralysed. I was hallucinating. I thought our sitting room was school. I thought I was in assembly. I didn't think mum was mum. It was the bizarrest feeling ever, but it's so weird because I do remember it so vividly. And I remember going, I'm fine, I don't need to go to hospital. And obviously I really did need to go to hospital. Mm-hmm. And I even remember before it actually happened, me laying out my PE kit for the next day because I loved PE and it was happening the next day. So I always laid my uniform out ready. And I remember doing all that. I remember going to bed and I remember I woke up it was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning when it happened. And I went into my mother's room and I said, I'm feeling really weird. And I couldn't talk. So my lip had dropped and I was basically couldn't speak.
Oh, so it was speech paralysis.
Yes.
Rather than physical paralysis, right? Okay,
yes,
right, yeah.
Speech and so I couldn't move my left arm, I couldn't move my left leg. So obviously my mother was terrified and she rang 999 and we went to hospital. But it's so weird because I can remember it was like a light switch had just gone off. It was like I went into that hospital being a very happy-go-lucky, outward-going, very confident young girl. Probably looking back, there was probably a few things at school. I always wanted to be with a teacher and I hated being late, and I was always a bit worried about if my parents would pick me up on time. So a few little things, but nothing major. And I left that hospital a completely different little girl. 24 hours, my life had changed in an instant. And we remember the good memories, but we also, our brain is very good at remembering the very difficult times. And I can remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, so sorry to hear that. I mean, but can you tell, so when you're saying, so literally when your life changed after that, so in what way, like, do you mean in the immediate days and weeks after leaving hospital?
Yes. So from that situation that happened, I became terrified of everything. I was and this happened probably in about a 6-week period. And during that it was probably 6 to 8 week period, actually. During that time, I actually left the lovely little village primary school I was at because our home was 45 minutes away from that primary school. And my parents and doctors thought that maybe I was having these funny paralysation and blindness and not being able to talk episodes because I was having a reduced amount of sleep because we had to get up very early to go to school, etc.
Yeah.
I was still continuing to have the physical health symptoms as well, and they were happening on a very regular basis, nearly every other day at one point during this 6 to 8 week period. So I moved schools, and in hindsight, it's a wonderful thing, hindsight, because that was the worst thing we could have ever done. I moved to this school, again, it was a village primary school, but I started to crumble. It was like this big black hole had opened and it was just getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And it happened so quickly. I came happy-go-lucky young child, terrified of everything, not wanting to leave my home, not wanting to live, thinking everyone was better off without me. And I was actually excluded from that private school I moved to after only about a month of being there because they were ashamed and embarrassed to have people with mental health conditions at that school. And after I'd been excluded, I was then seen by child psychiatrists, and they diagnosed me with 4 mental illnesses, and I was labelled. And it was incredibly difficult because I'd lost my childhood because I'd been excluded from school. I'd been labelled with these 4 mental illnesses, which were PTSD, OCD, depression, and panic attacks. I now know I will live with those labels for the rest of my life. I was given those labels, not wanting to live, and nearly sectioned at a tier 4 clinic. And I thought, I had no idea what was happening to me. I didn't know at all what these mental illnesses were. And it was very scary, not only because of how debilitating my mental illness was and becoming completely housebound. It was also, I was in a state of complete shock and having no understanding of what was happening to me and why it was happening to me.
And so what sort of support or treatment did you get? And what was the period between those 6 or 8 weeks where you're really, really, really challenging, and then I'm getting the diagnosis? Was that all within the 6 or 8 weeks, or?
No. I wish it was. No, it took probably around 6 months to get those full diagnoses. And it took probably a good year to get the support I really needed. And this is it's something I'm very passionate about, and probably one of the reasons why I became a campaigner, because I think when obviously my mental health crisis started when I was at such a young age, And it was quite a while ago now. So obviously things have changed a lot, but there is so much more that needs to happen surrounding the support you can get and also how you are treated.
Yeah.
Because I remember going to this child psychiatrist and I remember seeing them and I just didn't gel with them at all. And I remember them always saying to me, well, you've got the same labels as this group of people, so we'll treat you exactly the same. They put you in this box and they think, well, because that handful of people has the same labels as Flo, then the medication that worked for them and the therapy that worked for them is going to work for Flo. That's not the case at all. We're all individual. And I'm incredibly lucky that I have my amazing, wonderful mother. And if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be sitting here today, who fought to get the right support for me to get the right people that I needed to have to help me on my journey.
Yeah, no, I think what you highlight there, and I think Craig's trying to come in as well, is the importance of that tailored response. But I suppose it also reflects the reality that if you look at the research evidence for evidence base for different treatments or different interventions, I mean, they often don't take into account the sort of what we would describe as sort of that comorbidity or that multimorbidity, that you're lots of different symptoms at play, and obviously lots of conditions, and then add to that the sort of physical dimension, which we'll talk about as well. But you were saying but you did, thankfully, through the persistence of your mother, you did. And so what worked in terms of support in terms of in the longer term?
So for me, I was incredibly lucky to meet this wonderful child psychologist, and she was life-changing for me. She was amazing, and she basically treated me as me. And what really helped, we just did talking, and it's such a basic thing, but it helped me so much. Having someone that wasn't my family who I could open up to and talk to, and it's really difficult when you're at such a young age to open up, but she gave me that safe place to speak up, and she understood me, and I felt that I was listened to and I was treated as Flo, not just as another handful of people that have the same labels as me. And that, I think, is crucial. And I also was very lucky to meet one of the only child hypnotherapists at the time in the UK, who was unbelievable. I'm so grateful that I was able to have the support from her and do child hypnotherapy, because that was a big stepping stone in my recovery, having that hypnotherapy. But it wasn't just, I think, important for me to say is that it wasn't just I had 6 months to a year of seeing those psychologists and the hypnotherapists and I was a cured person. That wasn't the case at all. You know, I've had to continue to battle. I still, to this day, I still fight those hurdles. I still have those mental illnesses. So yes, I'm so much better than I was and had amazing support and therapy, but it's not just been therapy for me that's helped me.
But I think, you know, the point you're making there about the nature of the relationship. So you found that the clinical psychologist, I think the child clinical psychologist, and you just connected. And but that really highlights the importance of the sort of therapeutic alliance or the therapeutic relationship. And if you look at the evidences for a whole range of psychological treatments, it's trying to disentangle what are the active ingredients of that treatment.
Yeah.
And of course, an important part of that is that relationship. And it's just really interesting to hear you talk about, I mean, the characteristics of active listening, so, or of good therapeutic relationships. I mean, that sense of validation, feeling heard, I think is so important. And then just that individual approach is they're speaking to you. What is it is about you, rather than a label or other people who have similar symptoms. 100%.
And I think for me as well, one of the reasons I really connected with this lady is because she had lived mental health experience herself. She'd been through it. You know, she had PTSD herself. She'd been through child trauma. So she really understood it from her own personal point, and that really helped me. I thought, actually, I'm speaking to someone who is doing an amazing job with me, and she's been through trauma herself, and she's had a difficult time, and she's made it where she is today. And that really gave me hope and really gave me, I can get through this with her help and a lot of other people's help as well.
Oh, that's great. And then, so I understand then that for 2 years then you were housebound. Was that at the same period, or is that later in life? Or
No, that was at the same period. So from about 8.5 to 10.5, I was completely housebound. The only time I left my house was to walk in the fields with my dog. And that was my only time where I felt my mind was free. If it was like 30 minutes where I was like, could escape my mind and the torment that was happening in my mind. At times, I wouldn't even let my family leave the home because I was so scared of their safety. And it was a long journey, and it took a long time, a lot of steps for me to become from completely housebound to coming in, going out again, going out in public. But it took a good, probably I'd say my worst times were between 8.5 when it all began to probably 13. That was my trickiest time. And there was a lot of up and downs. I call my journey a real roller coaster ride because there was so many lows. And there were some highs as well, but that was probably the most trickiest time, being completely housebound. And I was terrified of everything. And I also didn't want to live. You know, I thought my family and everyone around me was better off without me.
I know it's so sad to hear that, but as we know, why areas of research is in suicide and suicide prevention, and what you're just highlighting is one of the common themes, is that people who are suicidal often feel that they're a burden on loved ones. But it's always heartbreaking to hear that, especially for somebody so young. You say between your 8, 9, 10s when you.
Yeah, I mean, I used to, if we were in the car, I would always sit in the back of the car and I would try and open the door to jump out the car when the car was moving, because I thought that was the easiest thing. That would go through my head every time I got into a car. And I was 9 years old at this point. There were times that, and I've never actually spoken about this, but I feel ready to now. I used to go to bed at the ages of 10 and I hide a knife under my bed because I thought if I do it at night, it will be easier and better for my family, and I just do it in my bed. That's a 9-year-old young girl who's thinking that. And it was really tough. And there's been, you know, I still have to this day suicidal thoughts, especially since my accident, which we'll talk about later on. You know, I still get those thoughts, but I'm only here today because of my incredible mother, and I can hand on heart say that. And I know how incredibly lucky I am to have had that support and someone there for me, because if she wasn't there, I wouldn't be here today.
Great, and we're so pleased you're here as well. But again, your message is a message of hope, and I think others listening to this is it's really important to remember that you have got through it, and I know as you've said, you still have mental health struggles and challenges, of course, but you've got through that period and before puberty, and that's what's so unusual, because usually most cases mental health problems are so rare before puberty. But of course, what we're linking it to is your own obviously traumatic experience in hospital, of course, at such an early age. So then if we move forward then a bit then, so things so you said 8 through to 13 was the most difficult period. So then hopefully getting the help and support was good, and helped you in your journey of your recovery. But then so through your teens then, so mental health was much better?
I wouldn't say much better, no. I was definitely on a journey of understanding myself, understanding what the labels I'd been given meant. I was so ashamed for so long to have mental illness. I was so embarrassed by it. I mean, it took me to 16 for me even to be allowed to speak about it out in public, because I felt so weird. I felt not normal. I didn't have a normal teenage experience whatsoever. I was homeschooled, so I didn't have, all the friends. It was, yes, my mental health was better, but it was tiny little steps. And I think, I look back on my teenage years and think it was very different. It wasn't like any other normal, so-called normal teenage life. It was very unique to me, and I was starting to understand myself, starting to make a life that I could deal with and could get through each day and actually become positive about life. But it took time, and I think one of my things that really helped me, and it sounds so, such a cliche to say, but it was time. It was time to give myself to get not so-called better, because you're never cured from mental illness, but I gave myself time to understand myself and to live a life I wanted to live, and knew that I wasn't a freak and I wasn't strange, and that I shouldn't be ashamed to have mental health. And those labels I was given at such a young age, they don't define me. They're a small part of what makes me who I am today.
Was there a particular moment that made you feel that you was able to talk about it, or was it just literally just with time?
I would say it was time. And actually, I know social media gets such a bad, word at lots of times. But for me, it was actually starting to see well-known people talk about their own mental health struggles. And I actually thought, there are other people who are suffering, and me having these labels isn't not normal, and it isn't weird, and it isn't a freak. So that really helped me. And actually finding MQ, and thought, I'm going to share my story to help others, because I don't want other people to go through what I went through. And actually learning that sharing my story could help others was a big turning point for me in my recovery.
Just when you mentioned MQ again, so how did you get involved in MQ?
So I hit probably 17, and I thought, I want to share my story. I want to shout about mental health and mental illness. And when I was looking at all the different charities that possibly I could become an ambassador for, and talk about their work, there are lots of amazing mental health charities, but for me, the reason I chose MQ is because you're all about research. And I know from my own journey, if funding had been in place when I had my life-saving surgery at 4 months old, or when I had my mental health crisis at the age of 8.5, I know my journey would have been very different. And because when I had that mental health crisis, it took me to the age of 16 for anyone to tell me the reason why you have mental illness and had that mental breakdown is because you had such a traumatic experience at such a young baby, such a young age, and life-saving surgery. Well, if my parents had have known that when I had the mental health crisis, and doctors had have known, it could have been, preventions could have been put in place, and also there would have been more understanding. Well, Flo possibly may in her childhood or teenage years or adulthood could develop a mental illness because of her traumatic experiences. I believe my journey and story would have been very different. So that's why I wanted to help MQ and shout about their amazing work, because I know from my own personal experience how important research is, and actually how different my journey could have been if funding was in place for mental illness.
Yeah, and also the other point I think you're making as well is the importance of early intervention, because as we know, most mental health problems obviously onset of over 50%, or it depends which study you look at, before you're 18, some of them depending which research, but many by the age of 24 will have the onset of mental health problems is there. So we have to do as much earlier the better. And I think also that the link, and we know the link with trauma, but yours, so early, and that traumatic event at 8, or even in months, well, much younger as well, obviously, but culminating in what happened then at 8 as well is really important to make that link. And I think your story highlights this. It's one health approach. Is our well-being is both physical and mental health. And I think we're going to talk later about, I know you've had some really awful accidents during COVID, and we'll come back to that and the impact of that on your mental health in a wee second. But my understanding, again, reading about you, Flo, is obviously sport is a big part of, has been for your mental health. So you might tell us a bit about that and how that's been pretty life-saving for you earlier.
Yeah. So I'm incredibly lucky. My family have always been very sporty, and we've always lived in the beautiful countryside. So always had lovely open fields to kind of run around in and explore. And my mum was looking for someone when I was at my worst, because I was completely housebound, someone that could teach me a new skill and a new thing to get my mind occupied on something. And she found this incredible yoga teacher, and that became my savior. I did yoga in the fields, and we did super long walks as well. And sport, I go back to time and time again. For me, it can be yoga, it can be Pilates, it can be sprinting, it can be a really long hike. It gives me so much. Just being outside gives me so much. But sport, I know it will always save me time and time again. And that's been, that's always been the case since my mental health journey began, right up until now. And I know will continue to save me on many more roller coasters that will happen in my life, I'm sure.
No, that's great to hear. Great to hear. And so maybe thinking forward now to where you are now, and so is it still sport? Obviously, as part of managing your mental health still, but I know that as we just mentioned a second ago about you had an accident during COVID. Do you want to tell us about that and how that's impacted on your mental health?
Yeah, so I have always ridden horses and been very lucky to have ponies growing up. And I had been put on furlough from my marketing job during COVID, and I started helping out at the yard that my horse was liveried at. And I rode this horse and had a very freak accident in the field. And having that accident has completely changed my life once again. I now can't ride at all. And it was July 2020 when it happened. So it was in the height of COVID. I was in hospital all alone. I was told that I was 1 centimeter off being paralyzed on my spine. So hearing all these things and being told you're not going to be able to ride again and the life is going to be very different was very challenging. And I became rather depressed during summer 2020 because basically something that has been one of my saviors in my mental health journey and during my mental health crisis was taken away from me. I couldn't do a thing I loved. I couldn't do any walking or any fitness for 12 weeks. When that's been something that you've always been able to do and helps your mental health so much and has saved me so much, that taken away from you in a split second is really, really difficult. And unfortunately, the accident has caused me to start having seizures, and I had a head injury. So my mental health really dipped again during summer 2020, and it's getting better, but there are still a lot of physical health challenges that I'm having to deal with after that accident. And I think, for me, without mental health, there is no physical health. I think they're so connected. Yeah. And I always say, they need to be treated equally and they need to be looked at the same way, because that physical health accident, who has damaged my spine and my back, I'm very lucky to be walking still, but it's also damaged my mental health as well. And it's made me spiral, and my depressed thoughts have come back again. And that's all down to the accident.
And then, but you were saying, I think that sounds awful, truly awful, but great that, oh my God, you're saying you're 1 centimeter away from paralysis, or broken spine or whatever. It's just, it's so scary to think about that. But so then, given that sport or exercise was such an important part of your mental health, in terms of keeping yourself mentally healthy or healthier, so how have you, or what have you had to change then, which is to try and, I don't know, make up for the fact you can't do the horse riding now, or you can't, or you can still walk and so on, but you can't do the horse riding?
Yeah, so I'm very lucky to still have my horse. He's fully retired now, so just being with him really helps me. I can still do lovely long walks, and I kind of just had to channel my inner strength to keep fighting, to keep going, and know that this will pass, and that I'm not, at the moment I can't do yoga because my balance is so bad. But I just have to remember, well, there's so many things when I was younger that I couldn't do, and now I can do and get through. So I know I just have to keep fighting and strong. And I've just been kind of trying to do other sport things and doing lots more long walks and doing more. I used to love doing very high intense training in the gym and strength training. I now can't do that at the moment. So I've just channeled it into doing light Pilates and stuff like that, and trying to work with my body and what's going to help me. But I know I need to do something active and fitness related sport, because it's what helps me with my mental health. And if I don't look after that, then things will spiral even worse.
Yeah. Then just, well, I mean, it's great to see that, well, obviously, I mean, in the midst of the COVID-19, you're having an absolutely hellish time, and things have got better, which is great. But I know you're obviously saying that your mental health struggles obviously continue and will continue, but that in a way that you've just found a different way of trying to protect your mental health. So can we maybe just on the last few things, just as we sort of bring the podcast to a close, we always try and focus in on, you've touched on some of the things you want mental health research to do. And so one question we always ask is, so what's the one question, if you had all the money in the world, right? And I know with your experiences, what would be the one big question you would love us, mental health research, to tackle?
I would absolutely love the question. When I got this question, I was like, what is it? Because there are so many things, but I think the key thing for me is to understand, why can a mental health crisis or breakdown happen so quickly, and it can just come out of the blue? Because we know what caused mine, but why did it happen when I was 8? Why did it happen that one evening? I would love to know that. And I think for me, if I knew why it happened that one evening, I think would actually really help me in my recovery. So that's the one thing that I would love research to look into more, is finding, why does it happen on one particular evening or day, and why does it happen so quickly and can change your life in an instant?
Yeah, because I mean, that's an interesting question, because in one way you could argue the journey to your mental health crisis at 8 was a long journey from early months. Obviously, that's trauma then taking time to permeate or whatever impact it had. But you're right. But then on another level, it was really immediate in that moment when you're 8. So it's a great question, and it's a really important one to try to address. And I don't think we don't know the answer. I don't think about, because there's some go to physics. There's a whole thing about sort of that there are these tipping points, and that's been initially applied in the context of physics. Tipping points are catastrophe theory and things, and it's this idea then that they're all different tipping points, and there's lots of factors come to play in those tipping points, and so that in a way it's not like just that risk increases in a sort of linear way, but sometimes it might increase in a linear way, but then there's this catastrophe, this tipping point, and in your case it happened when you were 8 initially, and then it's that recovery. It's the new parameters that our health then take on, and so I think we need to try and understand those sorts of, I know that sounds a wee bit technical and not that interesting, but it's trying to help us understand why, that key question of why mental health crises seem to come out of the blue for some people. Other people, they don't, and I think that's a really important one. But I suppose it once again highlights the importance of taking these individual approaches. But then, in terms of the way science works, in terms of the way we develop treatments, you're trying to look at what are the common features. So we're always trying to find that balance between common features or common mechanisms which can explain, in this case, a mental health crisis, but also you want to do the individual as well. So it's often, so in this sort of science literature, we talk about this sort of idiographic meets the nomothetic, would be the two terms, and you're trying to have both of those. And it is really, really difficult. Now, you're reflecting on, I suppose, your journey, and you obviously decided MQ is an important charter. You really want to focus on the research, but can you, on reflecting on the last 20 years, more or less, or almost 20 years of your life, so have you seen marked changes in terms of attitudes towards mental health, and maybe the importance of mental health research? How do you see things in that respect?
I think there's been a huge change of how mental health is spoken about, and I don't think people are as ashamed as they used to be, and I think the stigma is reducing. But I think from when my mental health crisis started to now, there has nowhere near been the change that I would have liked to see in how mental health research is funded. I'm a big believer in prevention, and there is so much more work that needs to be done in schools. When I do a lot of talks in schools, and I think actually it hasn't really changed that much from when I was excluded. And, children, they're the next generation. Mental health work needs to be done so much more, and so much more needs to happen. Talking is great. It was one of my saviors, but we need to start doing things about research, about what's going to help lots of people in different areas and through different walks of life. And also, lots have changed, and I'm delighted that the stigma is reducing and people are talking about it more, but I would have liked to have seen a lot more change happen than what I have seen. And I hope in the next 10 years, funding is so much greater for mental health, because it's just as important as physical health. If you look at the statistics surrounding physical health research to mental health, it's shocking, and it needs to change.
It truly is shocking and remains shocking. Sorry, Craig, you're trying to come in there.
In your opinion, what could someone do to support a child with a mental health issue?
I think for me, it's being a listening ear. And I know it sounds so simple and so basic, but it was what saved my life. Having a mother who I knew I could go to and speak to and open up to, and know she was going to be proud of me, she was going to support me and get the help I needed, was what I really needed at that time. And it's something so simple, but I urge all parents to, one, start talking about mental health and mental illness with your children as young as possible, so they have a greater understanding. And two, ask your child twice, are you really okay? And make those conversations a daily occurrence, and make mental health something you talk about just like you do physical health. I think those are the key things for me.
Yeah, I think they're two really great points. And I think especially that ask twice, always ask twice, so that you get beyond the, are you okay? Yes, I'm okay. But then if you push again, you might get to maybe what's going on for the person. I have two last questions for you to bring it to an end, Flo. One is, so with your mental health advocacy hat on, what are you hoping to achieve in the next 5 years?
I would love to get much more education surrounding mental health in schools. That's my biggest thing. I want children to have a greater understanding surrounding mental health and mental illness. It's one of my key reasons why I started sharing my story, because I don't want anyone else to lose their childhood like I did because of my mental illnesses. So I'd love to see a lot more work done in schools, and I hope to do many more talks sharing my story in schools to inspire the next generation and show how important mental health is.
Yeah, fantastic. And then just one last question, just again, trying to end on a sort of upbeat note, and your inspirational notes there are great. But the last one we ask all our guests is to try and think about, so what advice would you give your 15 or 16-year-old self, looking back now a few years?
That is a very, very good question. And I think for me, it would be, know that everything will be okay. Even in the darkest time, the light will shine again. And you will get through life, and you will have some amazing days and positive days. And I never thought that I would be doing the job I do now and have an amazing partner. Like, I could have never dreamt that. And I'm standing living proof that I am here today. And I think just always believe that even in the darkest hole, there will be a flicker of light, and you've just got to keep hold of that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. No, that's such a brilliant way to end. And always believe, I like that. Good, two good words. Always believe is a great way to end. So on behalf of Craig and I and MQ, thanks for your ambassadorial role, if I can get the word out correctly, and also and for sharing your story and continuing to share your story, which is inspirational and really will contribute to that tackling stigma, and hopefully we'll move some distance in the next few years in having more of an equal investment in mental health and physical health research. We are going in the right direction, but we still have quite a way to go. So huge thanks from both of us. Flo, thanks a million, and have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Thanks.
You.